Welcome back, 3:05 on this Monday afternoon. Kind of gray out there and a whole lot cooler than it was 24 hours ago. So I think we have some light periods of rain on and off through the rest of the day today, so just keep that in mind. So I'm going through the Gazette today, and I happen to see Allison Haynes calling. I see Jack Jedwab's face there. And I'm thinking, is there a new survey out? What's going on? And then I read the story, and it's actually quite fascinating because apparently there will be new data coming out soon. But this concerns polling here in Quebec from 2006 to 2016. And I don't remember ever reading much about that data or how significant it was. And then I started digging a little deeper and finding out this idea of it really depends to some degree when you talk language in this province, just how in-depth the question actually is. So Jack Jedwab is on the line. He's president of the Association for Canadian Studies. Jack, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, Aaron. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So let's go back here because the data, we talk about, or you're talking about in the beginning of the story today, goes back to 2016. And what did you find?
Well, there's two things, actually. One is a comparison between 2006 and 2016. That's census data. And we'll see how, that same data plays out in another 10 days, less than 10 days, actually, when the 2021 census comes out. But the thing I'm drawing attention to is the extent to which people responding said they were multiple respondent language identity people, so that we're looking at how many people said they were both English and French, English and non-official language as their first language, French and a non-official language as their first languages, and English, French, and non-official languages. And between 2006 and 2016, the increases were really, really strong. So English and French increased by 70% in terms of the number of people given those dual responses. English and allophone, 100%, so it doubled. French and non-official, 150%. And people giving three answers increased 250% over those 10 years. So those are very substantial increases. And in a place like Quebec, where every decimal counts when it comes to measuring out how many francophones there are relative to how many anglophones and allophones there are, that growing percentage of people giving multiple responses is something that you need to take a harder look at.
That's the part that I kind of, sat back and did a double take, because you say that on questions of ethnic origins, you're encouraged to give more than an answer. But when it comes to questions on language, it's black and white. It's one or the other. And that's clearly not the way it should be. That's why these answers, or at least this information, is beginning to change.
Right, because it's not the information change. Actually, the same type of methodology is still used. So you're encouraged to either say it's English, French, or other, or neither. And some people check more than one box, but people are having increasingly the tendency is to check more than one box, independent of the fact there's no change to the way in which the question's formulated, simply because they're being encouraged, I think, to a great extent to think it's okay to give multiple responses to these things, and that probably better reflects who those people are when they give the responses. The reason that the methodology is like that, where it's confined to checking that single box with the three options, is because it's rooted in a time when it was very important in terms of determining what type of language services were needed by minorities to be able to tell you if they're French or English as an indication of whether they need the service in either French or English. So a lot of this has been rooted in that tradition of wanting to get to those single boxes so we could determine how to allocate those services, when the reality increasingly, especially in a place like Montreal, is a lot of people are of mixed language backgrounds.
I was thinking about how this should just be an absolutely beautiful thing. What a beautiful thing to see how many different languages are spoken at home. But then the thought that went through my head, Jack, was that François Legault is probably completely freaking at these numbers, and it completely plays into his narrative that the French language is in peril here in Quebec. Is that true? Does this present that picture?
It may, because of the way in which these numbers get distributed in terms of determining how what the eventual estimate is for the percentage or numbers of francophones and anglophones, because you usually get distributed on a 50-50 basis. So that means that if you've got 80% of the population in Quebec that's French and 20% that's English, those people who say they're both English and French get distributed on a 50-50 basis. So that's going to mean that there's sort of disproportionate advantage for people who are English in terms of the outcomes when the percentages are reallocated. If you're sort of following that note, can be a bit complex, but that's what ends up happening. Mm-hmm. So all those multiple responses in terms of what their final estimates are going to come down to how that distribution is made. And And that group in, again, Quebec, where if it's 49.1% on the island of Montreal as opposed to the Montreal region, which, the tabloid columnists and some of the harder line demographers like to sort of focus on the island of Montreal as opposed to, again, the bigger region, are going to say if it's 49.1, we're a minority, we're doomed. And that's it, because every single decimal point counts to them. And so any incremental decrease is going to, again, get Francois Legault and some of the people who are pushing this to say that French is in free fall and we desperately need to take more aggressive measures to protect it, which my sense is you're going to hear that anyways, whatever the census results are.
Yeah, one way or the other.
Fair enough.
For sure we're going to hear that, of course.
Yeah.
But I wonder, too, you remember that thing from a little while ago when Francois Legault was talking about mother tongue, because that became the big issue, and people were outraged by virtue of the fact that he was sticking his nose into people's homes. And I wonder, it's not clearly, as this points out, it's not black and white, Jack. It's a whole lot of gray.
Yeah, there's a lot of gray in this. And, I've always felt, but it's very hard to get this unpacked or modified, that the way in which the numbers and percentages get presented that combines Anglophones with allophones into the non-Francophones is also somewhat misleading, because that's not one group, the non-Francophones. Actually, you can argue that the Anglophones, yes, English is the language that connects or unites those people who say they're Anglophones, but the allophones, that's upwards of 200 languages. So to sort of roll them together with the Anglophones and then say, we're no longer the majority in the island of Montreal, all those non-Francophones are the majority. What language are they going to impose on the Francophones? Is it Esperanto? I did a big conference last week, by the way, on Esperanto here. But they're operating with many other languages. So that way of unpacking things isn't necessarily a thoughtful or good way to do it, unless, of course, you want to do so for the purposes of enhancing the threat to the French language.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the Anglophones seeing themselves as partial Francophones as opposed to Francophones seeing themselves as partial Anglophones? Because, again, I'm seeing that as a very encouraging thing. Like, as an Anglophone who makes an effort to try to speak some French in the household, this should bode very well.
Yes, one would think so. And the survey that I did to try to better understand that, which is different from the census, because I broke it down into multiple options where I asked, are you only English, only French, mostly English but partly French, mostly English but partly other, mostly English, partly French. And so I give you a bunch of options to try to get something a bit more granular, if you like, in terms of, how people express and define themselves on the basis of language. And it was fascinating, actually, because you see amongst the Francophones, 56% say they're only French, right? You get about 27% that are saying, I'm mostly French but partly English. So that's why I argue there's a bit of an inner Anglophone in a lot of Francophones, and there's a lot of inner Francophone in a lot of Anglophones as well. So that amongst Anglophones, you get 36% who say, I'm mostly English but partly French. Only 26, in fact, percent of the sample say, I'm only English. So there's a lot more mixing in terms of our personalities, and it's a function of a lot of changes we've seen over time where people marry across language lines to a much greater degree, interact to a much greater degree across language lines, have family and friends. Almost everyone I know has a family member who's Francophone, and certainly friends who are Francophones or Anglophones. So there's been a lot more of that mixing. And I don't know how the tabloid columnists in some newspapers that I won't mention right now treat that issue. I think they tend to ignore it because it would involve them really chastising some Francophones for mixing, which is certainly something they don't want to do.
So you're talking about how in those 10 years from 06 to 2016, the numbers changed, got better if you want to call it that. So you're saying we have new data coming out in about a week from StatsCan. I realize it's kind of unfair to ask you what you expect, but is it fair to assume that those numbers will continue to increase as far as the mixing goes of languages?
I think the mixing will continue to increase because it was such a big upward trend. My suspicion is it'll just build on itself. So we'll see even more of that as we go forward. And it almost at a certain point, given when you accumulate the percentages of people who are saying they're mixed, seems to formulate a block on its own because it's going to have a very determining impact on the way that calculation gets done of what the percentage of Francophones in a selected geography, say in Montreal or variations of Montreal like the island are, when you have to account for that growing percentage of people who are declaring multiple identities.
I just think to myself, though, you have a Montreal sort of centric number, and then you have the rest of Quebec. And that, of course, the premier, as we said before, I'm not going to put words in anyone's mouth, but we'll use these demographers who, are having an issue with the language. We'll use these to show, see, more and more people speaking English, bad thing, even those who are coming here as immigrants. This stuff is important, isn't it? When the numbers come out, as you said, it takes only a little tick to get someone like a premier to stand up and say, see, it's getting worse.
Yeah, and I presume he's already got that ready. That's already been written down. The press release is ready to roll. He's just waiting, till next week to release. But yeah, probably that is what you're going to see. That it's going to be worse, and the numbers will be presented in a way that leads us to conclude that that's the case, because there are different ways of cutting the numbers, right? So my sense is you probably see something like that. A lot of it's attributable in terms of the changes to immigration, interprovincial migration. We won't see those numbers for another couple of months, right? Because they won't come out next week. They come out a little later on. But independent of that, we're going to see conclusions drawn almost instantly after the results come out.
Fascinating stuff. And yeah, it's going to be real interesting to see the next one, as you said, only about a week or so away, and see just how the numbers change if this trend continues.
I love that we're not feeling like we need to just check one box. I love that.
Yeah, and the Premier will hate that.
He will hate it.
Jack Jedwab, the Canadian Association of Studies. Jack, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
No problem, Aaron. No problem, Natasha. Keep well.
Take care.
You too.
Jack Jedwab.